CAGP Foundation. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Tara Sandler, and I'm the Vice President of Education and Partnerships here at CAGP. Before we begin, I would like to start by recognizing the many territories of Turtle Island, known to us as Canada, on which we work and reside. Excuse me. These territories are home to many Indigenous people who have lived here for tens of thousands of years and who continue to live here. We acknowledge that our ability to live and work on these lands today is a direct benefit of policies of expulsion and assimilation of Indigenous peoples during the times of settlement and the Confederation. The harms of these policies are many and are still being felt in Indigenous communities today. We express gratitude towards the Indigenous peoples who have and will continue to steward these lands. We commit to amplifying the voices of these peoples and working against everyday forces of white supremacy. And colonialism present in the nonprofit sector. For those interested in identifying the territory on which you reside or are interested in gathering locally, please visit www.native-land.ca. So folks, it's great to be here with you today. Before we begin today's webinar, I do have a few housekeeping items to share with you. We do ask that you stay muted and off camera during the duration of the webinar. If you have any questions for our presenters, please post them in the chat box. They will be collected throughout the presentation and they will be posed at the end of the presentation during the Q&A period. We are happy to offer real-time transcription during the webinar. In order to enable or disable this function, you can click on the CC icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We are also offering real-time translation. If you wish to see the content translated in a language other than English, you can click on the arrow by the CC button on the bottom of your screen as well, and then turn on the translation. You will have the ability to select the languages as well as the language of caption. You will note that the login email that Aaron sent to you, there is a link to a Dropbox folder. In that folder, you will find tracker sheets connected to CFRE and MFA-P credit tracker sheets for today's webinar for those credits, as well as bios of our presenters and the PowerPoint of today's presentation. You will also receive an email with the link to the recording of this presentation within the next 24 hours. So just before we get to the exciting content, I do want to take a moment and thank our generous sponsors, Pear Tree Canada, who also have a video to share with you today.
Hello from beautiful Toronto, Ontario. My name is Les Ross, and on behalf of Pear Tree Canada, as a proud ongoing CAGP sponsor, I am very pleased to welcome you to the CAGP Webinar Wednesday series. Pear Tree Canada was founded over 15 years ago, offering a unique and strategic approach to lowering the after-tax cost of annual major gifts using our flow-through share donation platform. Over the coming months, you will hear from my colleagues across Canada welcoming you to each webinar. Pear Tree has a Canada-wide presence, which means we likely know you, charity or advisor, and the intricacies of your audiences. Our proven platform is widely accepted by Canadian philanthropists and their wealth, tax, and legal advisors. From grassroots organizations to the largest institutions, Pear Tree helps major gift donors give more, resulting in transformational giving while simultaneously funding job creation in Canada's northern and remote communities. I invite you to visit peartreecanada.com to learn more. And now, enjoy the webinar.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And I do encourage you, if you have questions about Pear Tree Canada, you can feel free to pop on and visit their websites. So now for the really exciting part. It gives me great pleasure to moderate the session and to take a moment to introduce you to today's presenters, who will have appeared on your screen as well. Nicola Elkins is the founder and CEO of the Benefaction Foundation and managing editor of the Master Financial Advisory Philanthropy course offered by CAGP, Knowledge Bureau, and Spire Philanthropy. Malcolm Burrows is the head of philanthropic advisor services at Scotia Wealth Management and the founder and executive director of the Aqueduct Foundation. Nicola and Malcolm are both members of the CAGP Government Relations Committee and co-chairs of the CAGP DAF Working Group. Thank you both for being here today. I will let you take it from here. And as a reminder to folks, please leave your questions in the chat function and we will get to them at the end. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, let me know if you can see it.
Sure can. It looks great.
Okay.
And that looks even better. Thank you. Terrific. It's Malcolm Burrows here. Thank you all for joining today. It's so wonderful. I love the CAGP webinars because you can see all sorts of friends and colleagues pop on name by name by name. It gives me a nice warm feeling just to know so many people that have joined today. And Nicola and I are sharing a bit of an update on CAGP's Donor Advised Fund, or DAF, working group. One of the things that I wanted to just sort of throw out there at the beginning, this is something that we had prepared and shared at last month's conference in Edmonton, and it was a really, really valuable dialogue for us. This is an important area that's growing tremendously in Canada, in the Canadian charitable community, and has been important for philanthropy and granting, but it's also been a bit of a source of discomfort because it's changed the way people have been giving in some ways. So this working group came out of some of this concern, particularly coming out of the pandemic, but also the strength of the different foundations with donor advised funds. And we've titled this session Best Practices in Donor Advised Funds, and we realized that we probably should have changed it. It's really more of a bit of an update on, because collectively we're coming together as a community to try and figure out how best to improve the practices of donor advised funds, how to learn from each other, how to work well, getting wonderful feedback from charities that are receiving grants from donor advised funds, have donors that have donor advised funds at different foundations. So really trying to sort of understand better, how do we improve practice and how do we work together as a community to do this. So this is really sort of what this is about today. And it's really one step in a process as well. And our agenda, starting with what is a donor advised fund, we wanted to start with a bit of a level set, then an overview of our donor advised fund, or DAF working group, and then some of the top learnings, and then Nicola is going to jump in with some of the key issues that have come out of this process so far. And then we really want to invite you as participants to send in your questions, for those of you who are comfortable to shout out and speak out loud. It's really important to have this, we view it as a conversation, and it's also very much a progress report. So moving to the next slide, thank you. What is a donor advised fund, or a DAF? And it's so interesting right now. Just a bit of background before I get into the specifics of this definition. Donor advised funds are essentially a charitable fund, and a charitable fund that allows a donor, the person that sets it up, or people, to provide ongoing advice about what the money will do. So rather than an irrevocable donation, yes, it's irrevocable, you're never getting it back. You have this fund and you can make ongoing recommendations or provide advice about what that fund will support, as long as it's charitable. And this is something that's been a long-standing feature of the charitable sector. They were invented in the US through the Community Foundations movement back in about 100 years or so ago. They've been in Canada in a formal sense since 1950. At the Vancouver Foundation. So they're an outgrowth of the Community Foundation movement, but they really became turbocharged starting first in the US in the 1990s when the investment firm Fidelity got into the world and created a separate standalone charity that had donor advised funds. It's only more recently in Canada that we've sort of caught up and tried to figure out as a sector, and this includes Canada Revenue Agency, or CRA, which is our chief regulator in the sector, what the actual definition is. So I'm finally going to get to the slide, you'll be pleased to know. So CRA recently added this in the T3010, or the annual charity return guidance. And so this is the only sort of formal Canadian definition. And so a DAF is a fund. It's segregated into donor accounts, and it's owned and controlled by a registered charity. So the idea is that it's an individual fund, and it's owned and controlled by an individual registered charity. Each account is comprised of contributions made by individual donors. So these are donations or gifts that go in, and the donor may provide ongoing non-binding suggestions on payouts, all for charitable purposes, from a donor-advised fund. But of course, it's the charity's sole responsibility to make sure that these decisions are charitable, and whether or not they'll take place. In actual fact, what the attraction of donor-advised funds to so many donors is that it provides the opportunity to make a larger gift from assets, which is very familiar to gift planners on the call, and then break it down into much smaller grants that go out the door. And classically is that the foundation that holds a donor-advised fund is typically very supportive, as long as it's within the charitable purposes of the foundation. Although each foundation has its own policies and procedures and amounts and minimums and annual granting cycle, fundamentally, there's this understanding that they're there to support the wishes of the individual donors, to support the charities of their choice. The next slide. So what charities actually hold donor-advised funds here in Canada? And the rule of thumb right now, we're beginning to find out, because we're just getting data from this CRA collection process, which I'll get back to in a minute. But Canada has approximately 200 registered charities with donor-advised funds, meaning it's sort of a key part of what they do and what they offer donors. So it's not just, and they break down into different groups. Most of them are public foundations. So there's public foundations in the Canadian system, as I'm sure most of you know, of the 86,000 registered charities. There are charitable organizations that doing charities. It's about 87%. There's public foundations, which are primarily granting organizations, but they have arm's length boards, and then there's private foundations. Most with donor-advised funds are public foundations, and in terms of absolute numbers, it's actually the community foundation movement. As I previously mentioned, it was the Vancouver Foundation that first offered Canada's first donor-advised fund in 1952. And the community foundation movement, there's over 200 now across Canada, are still the most numerous foundations with donor-advised funds. Each foundation defines its donor-advised funds based on its own missions and policies. And this is a really key point. Often there's a perception that a donor-advised fund is just sort of some generic structure, and they all do the same thing. They all have the same minimums, things like that. And the truth couldn't be further from that. In actual fact, each foundation has its own policies, just the same way that all of you have your own missions, your own policies, your own procedures, your own boards, your own sort of administrative management teams. And each one of those defines what a donor-advised fund does, how it's governed, what's the oversight process, minimums, maximums, investment flexibility, and things like that. Some, for example, just make simple grants to other Canadian qualified donees or registered charities. Some have charitable programs as well, for example, like scholarships. Different foundations accept different types of funds. So some are just very simply the cash and public securities, and others accept more complex funds. Some are even beginning to grant to non-qualified donees, for example, which is another factor, particularly in the community foundation movement. So the idea is that there's tremendous diversity across these 200 foundations. Many foundations with donor advised funds also have other types of funds, and this leads to a key question. One of the things that we often hear is we hear about DAFs, as if a DAF is a registered charity. Well, a DAF is a fund, not a registered charity. And so a community foundation can have DAFs. A Benefaction Foundation, which Nicola founded and runs, has donor advised funds as well. So there's lots of different variants within the Canadian charitable sector, and each one are defined according to the individual foundation that holds them. And that's a key takeaway, and one of the things that we've really been reminded of throughout this process. So next slide. Just going back to the question of what is a DAF, in our world, it's a fund established on behalf of an individual, multiple donors, a group, association, or business. Again, depends from foundation to foundation what they do and where they focus, but sort of broadly defined, it's established by some sort of donor, and the donor or donors name the fund, such as our family legacy fund, or sometimes even our, the Nicola Elkins Family Foundation, for example, could be a name of a donor advised funds. Unlike other charitable funds, DAFs are established without any initial commitment to support a particular cause or charity. So the whole thing is, what it really does, and I often describe it this way to donors, is it separates the act of making the donation from the final designation of where the money goes. And as dealing with larger sums, that's often very valuable because you want to do planning and you want to figure out where it's going to go. You know that you wanted to give it to charity, but you're not sure which charities, or you want to work on a number of different programs over time. You want to get family involved. That's one of the great advantages of a donor advised fund. So the donors or grant advisors, again, may provide grant recommendations, this advice, to the foundation related to the charitable expenditure from their fund. And some foundations also, and we'll get into this a bit later, also provide donors with options to recommend approved investment, different investment options or portfolios, and continue to work with their existing investment advisors. And this has been one of the sort of key differences as although this also occurs in the community foundations, it's something that there's a number of foundations that are associated with financial institutions. Some are independent, but often there's a good, strong working relationship with individual financial institutions or investment advisors. And so it's a collaborative process that allows donors to retain their investment advisors, and that also helps them sort of keep all of their affairs together. Next slide. Thank you. So one of the things, just a little bit more about our donor advised fund working group. We started back in January 2024 to bring together DAF foundations from across the country, but also interested members from the charitable community. So we've taken very much a big tent approach. It's been such a pleasure working with Nicola on this. And I can't say enough about Nicola's sort of leadership and focus, delivery, and her ability to listen. And it's just been marvelous to work with her. And what we've ended up doing is, and we've both been really sort of both gratified and overwhelmed by the fact that we started with a very small group. In each meeting we have, there's more and more people that want to come. And so when we say it's a big tent, we've been inviting people, and the committee itself has been growing. Our initial mandate was 3 parts: to convene interested members of the charitable sector to share information and discuss issues of mutual interest related to donor advised funds and foundations. So that's where this notion of best practices in part comes from. But really it was that convening, that sharing, that's been so fundamental to this group, and we've learned a lot from each other, as I've mentioned so far. The other second point was to develop positions on legal and regulatory issues related to donor advised funds in Canada. We haven't really got there yet, but this is something that will be important. CRA for the last, I guess it was, it's now in the second year. So this, the 2024 T3010 or Charities Return is the second year CRA has asked for information about charities and whether or not they have donor advised funds. Supposedly in 2023, although not all of this information is yet published, but we've heard that over 400 or almost 400 registered charities reported to CRA that they had donor advised funds. Now that might be one or two, but they still have donor advised funds. So what we're seeing is the primary regulator in the sector being much more interested. And so we want to make sure that that the charitable sector has a voice and has some structure and organization, and we're really listening internally. And this leads to this final point: develop best practice guidelines for foundations with donor advised funds. And so right now, I had a great question that just flashed in front, but our membership is, I say 27 plus. When we did this last month, we're now over 30, and we're very much, we have a big tent. We do welcome people we want to hear. And the nature of the committee is such that it's, people come when they can come, and we're meeting sort of every month or two and working on a primary document, which we'll tell you a little bit more about in a second. But we have community foundations, we have operating charities, we have professional advisors, we have foundations with donor advised funds like Aqueduct Foundation, which I lead, which is associated with Scotia Wealth Management. But we probably the biggest group of donor advised foundations and people interested in donor advised funds that we've ever sort of gathered in Canada. So it's been very fruitful. As mentioned, Nicola and I are co-chair. And shout out, I suspect Keith is on the line. I hope he is, but Keith Sogren, who's just being one of the most important researchers recently in the charitable sector, and has been a key sort of resource to us and a drafter of a document that we're working on that we'll be sharing publicly. But again, you know, a lot of dedicated volunteer time.
You're here.
Nicola. And then just, please go ahead.
This one or am I?
I thought I was going to do this one because I screwed it up last time, I think. So.
Okay.
Okay. And then the one of the things that we've learned here is that there's been a number of top learnings, I guess, from this. Actually, what we'll do, Nicola, just because we've done this before, I'll do some, then you do some. I'll do the first two. Okay. So everybody can see us doing it in time. So there's been a number of top learnings that have come out of this. First and foremost, donor advised funds are really a hot topic for charities. I think a lot of charities have struggled about how to work with donor advised funds, get information from donor advised funds, whether or not they can apply for funding for foundations that hold donor advised funds. There's just been a whole range of issues, and they relate to everything from education, trust, issues of competition as well, which are real and sometimes challenging to deal with, as well as transparency. So again, trying to make sure that we have a place for this within CAGP, within the charitable sector, that we can work through some of these issues. And like all hot topics, you're not going to be able to fully resolve all of them to everybody's sort of mutual satisfaction. But the fact that we have a forum for this and have the goodwill is being enormously important. We've also found as well, and we'll tell you a little bit about we're working on this primary document, and we've had extraordinary interest and participation from both foundations with donor advised funds, from charities that receive funding from a huge cross section. We had over 20 written submissions, some extraordinarily detailed, and we've also had sort of subsequent breakout and discussion about this. So this isn't just sort of a passive process, it's been enormously vibrant. And again, Nicola has been just a phenomenal sort of coordinator, collaborator, chair of this process.
Well, thank you very much, Malcolm, and for your kind comments. It's been wonderful working with you on this also. And I hope we will continue. Another learning, which Malcolm did mention earlier, that is that there's an enormous diversity of models and practices. Malcolm said we have 200 different DAF organizations, and there is no consistency really in standards of operation. And so we have learned a lot from one another. And, this document and some of the slides that we'll share today will share some of those. But it really, and we've relied heavily on CAGP to help us to coordinate and bring new people who want to participate in the working group in. But we have felt all along that really the sector representatives should be the one establishing best practices when that day comes, and we're not really there yet. And sort of determining any sort of self-regulation that we might choose to move forward with. So the guidelines document is really the result of all of those deliberations and discussions. We will see where we go from here. We do need guidelines that reflect our experience, and there are none really that are out there for the donor advised fund sector in particular. So that is one of our key learnings, and that's what we're trying to achieve here. So my job today is to discuss some of the key issues around donor advised funds. So I get some of the contentious stuff too, but one of the items we're going to talk about right up front is accumulation and retention of DAF assets. Another important one is operating charities and granting, and how the communication flows and sharing of information happens or doesn't, as the case may be, between DAF organizations and operating charities. We have a number of issues that we want to raise about investment governments and governance and financial advisors, who are key drivers of the growth in the donor advised fund sector. We'll talk about some issues regarding succession and estates where donor advised funds are involved with executors and with charities. And we'll sum up with a list of responsibilities that we as a group agreed were responsibilities that the DAF providers should be recognizing. So first off, it's the accumulation of retention and retention of DAF assets. There is a perception that DAF assets are not being dispersed, that they are being sat upon by DAF foundations, and fees are being generated for them and financial advisors, and you can see, based on this slide, the tremendous growth that the sector has experienced, with estimated assets this year being $12.5 billion, up a considerable amount from the previous year. But this tremendous growth, it has brought significant concerns with it, some from government officials, some from other charity executives. And the concern is not limited to donor advised funds necessarily. It's also extends to public and to private foundations in regard to the idea that foundations are accumulating and sitting on assets and not dispersing. So why is, the reasons that people are concerned about this, of course, is there is a perception that there is delay to the public benefit that these donations are to impart on society. After all, the donors getting their tax receipt up front, CRA is issuing or enabling the charitable tax credit to be used. But sometimes grant recipients are not receiving their gifts immediately. So, to address some of these concerns, a number of people in the industry have sent some proposals to CRA. One was delaying the issuance of receipts from a DAF until they've actually dispersed. For donors to have actually dispersed based on their advice to the foundation. One was putting timelines on grant disbursements, so requiring that donor advised funds dispersed on a specific schedule. And then another was imposing annual disbursement quotas at the fund level. However, introducing any of these would appear unnecessary given that the actual disbursement level is over 10%. It's double what the disbursement quota was recently raised to. And so, there is evidence that these DAFs are dispersing. Now, some might say not enough and there should be more disbursements, but ultimately, there is disbursement happening at double what is required currently. And there are also some concerns based on those proposals that some organizations would find, administering disbursements at the DAF level or any of the other proposals that were made to be significantly burdensome administratively. So having said that, there are some of us who do disperse at the fund level and hold each fund accountable to that amount. But certainly not all, and it's not a requirement for charitable organizations to do that. So moving on, the next main issue area was operating charities and granting. And there are three keys in there: improving collaboration, improving stewardship, and anonymity. And this is really about, we're trying to address and name the tensions that have and do continue to exist between operating charities and DAF organizations. And we think these three key areas are embody those, but also point us in the direction of trying to improve them. So some of the recommendations from the working group committee was to help improve collaboration by providing education and information resources for charities, making that available on their website and or just in conversations, which hopefully will increase and improve with charitable organizations. Ensuring grants have corresponding communication, even when they're delivered by electronic funds transfer. There has been a lot of feedback from operating charities that they do not know where these DAF grants are ultimately coming from in terms of the information for the underlying donor. Likewise, DAF organizations have said, but we send this information and that information isn't being recorded at the receiving operating charity, and maybe their databases aren't sufficient to be able to record both the grant making organization from where they're receiving the gift, but also the underlying donor and or its gift fund. The result of that, of course, is donors may not receive confirmation or thanks, at least not in a timely fashion, or sometimes not at all. Improving stewardship is another key area where we think we need to focus more time. DAFs should be more transparent and publicize granting and payment policies so that we can set expectations for operating charities who will be receiving charitable grants from these organizations. And helping with strategies to ensure charities can source and manage DAF grants. That's about helping in terms of trying to provide ideas about, addressing donor database issues and things of that nature. And providing charitable organizations with a better opportunity to steward their DAF donors, as they would any direct donor that would come to them. So the third element of this is anonymity, and this is a big one. There are a lot of people with significant opinions on this. So for the most part, the working group agree that most of our DAFs have multiple options for donor privacy. One is full disclosure. So the charitable organization will be given the name and address of the actual underlying donor, along with a grant, whether it be check or EFT. And we were reminded at the conference that we should also be giving email information and other information that would allow access to the donors for charities who might communicate with them in that way, which we will do. Fund name only is the other option, which many donors select. This may or may not include their family name. They select it for various reasons. It's their personal preference. It often means that operating charities don't have an address to mail things to or email things to, but those are the choices of a lot of our donors, so we adhere to those. And then anonymity, real anonymity, where the donor does not want the organizations to know who is giving them the gift. I have heard that some feel that the majority of DAF grants are sent in this fashion, and this is simply not the case. Less than 2% of grants from DAF organizations are going out on an anonymous basis. And it's important that charities also respect the few that do send out grants in that way. There can be many reasons: security of the family, a want and or need for privacy. But there are ways also for DAF organizations to help in those circumstances and offer to send letters of thanks directly to the donor, even though the charitable organization doesn't know. And that's a practice that we've started to do. So there are ways to help. The next main item is investment governance and financial advisors. I guess one of the key things here that we wanted to share is the issue of donor direction. So there are provincial trustee acts that oblige charities to exercise fiduciary control over the investments that they manage. And similarly, the Income Tax Act has a similar condition to demonstrate that a donor does not control assets gifted to a registered charity. The idea being, if the donor remains in control, that a gift is not really made, and the implication of that is that that could potentially jeopardize their tax receipt. That's not to say, however, that donors don't have the ability to name preferences, and they certainly may be, provided they're accepted by the DAF organization. But they can only be imposed, particularly if they're related to investments, at the beginning, upfront in the deed of gift, and not necessarily down the road when they feel that they want changes to be made. Another key investment governance issue is fiduciary duty, which I've mentioned. DAF foundations, the working group felt, should have an investment policy statement and a process in place to ensure that assets adhere to that policy. And a number also said we have a minimum goal to retain granting power of the assets, which means we're looking for returns on those assets equal to or in excess of fees plus inflation and potentially disbursements. Exceptions, of course, can be made at the discretion of the donor advised fund foundation. And they can also accept recommendations from DAF advisors, and DAF advisors being the donors, but also their financial advisors, in relation to things like impact investing, which is increasingly popular, particularly among private foundations, and private equity, which has been a popular one for us. In terms of impact investing, the one great thing we've got is that as relates to donor advised fund, there is some research underway, and I understand it will be out either later this month or early next. And hopefully that will give us a better picture on how donor advised fund donors feel about impact investing with their funds. And lastly on this one is the financial advisors. They play multiple roles, and sometimes, well, they're various roles, but sometimes they are literally wearing two hats. So they can be educators, making their clients, our donors, aware of different alternative giving vehicles, DAFs, private foundations, giving directly to charities of your choice. They can act as referrers, where they are introducing a DAF foundation to their client, but they're not involved necessarily in the financial investment of that potential DAF. Or they can be agents, where they are introducing an in-house staff program, their clients to an in-house staff program, which could become their donors. And or they can be investment managers and actually just simply managing the assets on behalf of the foundation for multiple donors. So those are the main issues on investments, succession and estate. So once a DAF advisor passes away, in other words, the donor passes away or becoming incapacitated, the responsibility of providing grant recommendations can fall to someone that they have named and appointed as a successor in their deed of gift and or subsequent documentation with the charitable organizations. So that's often a family member, or sometimes a group, or even an executor, or even in some cases the financial advisor of that individual. But if there's no successor identified, the fund becomes a bit of an orphan, and the foundation is responsible to use the assets for its charitable purposes. People have expressed to me, anyway, a lot of concern about that too. But the truth is that most organizations have got policies in place to ensure that assets continue to be distributed as the donor had done so during their lifetime. And so charities should rest somewhat assured that they will continue to be able to get gifts from those donor advised funds. Another issue in regard to this grouping is DAF termination or transferability. So there was a feeling that there should be a process in place to deal with situations where a donor decides to disperse a 100% of their fund out and close the account to a charitable organization, or potentially transfer their DAF to another DAF organization. In either case, and which does happen in a lot, because with financial advisors, they do move firms occasionally. But that information should be in writing. And usually what will happen is then the donor advised fund will be liquidated and cash will be transferred to the recipient charitable organization, DAF or otherwise. DAF foundations, we're not subject to divorce or to separation by its donors. And there may be various ways to deal with those situations, though, in a marital breakdowns. If both donors are named, we can choose to divide the fund and give each person their own fund, subject to minimums, of course. But if not, really, the person who is named on the donor agreement is the one that will retain the granting advice privileges and the rights to appoint a successor. Wills are a common way for donor advised funds to receive gifts, and an individual can name their donor advised fund organization in their will. Donors and certainly lawyers like this flexibility because it means they can name the foundation, but the donor's list of wishes in terms of which charities will ultimately get gifts through that foundation can be changed over time without going back and having to address the will. Power of attorneys and executors, important to note that they have no ability to make a grant from a donor advised fund, but they can, if dealing with an estate, make donations on behalf of the estate into a donor advised fund, provided that they have the sufficient powers in the will to do so. So all of these things ultimately, I think, provide flexibility and enables people and advisors to deal with estates and charitable wishes more flexibly, which I think is largely why they are such a popular giving vehicle. And lastly, the responsibilities of the foundation. So DAF foundations, they retain all legal rights and responsibilities for the fund assets and for making grants. And also a responsibility to ensure that donors are aware of this at the outset, that they won't own the asset anymore and that they won't have the opportunity to direct its investments. So in turn, the donor has no obligations in terms of compliance, reporting, or overall administration. Usually, the foundation provides fund level reporting on a regular basis to the donor, which might include asset levels, would include any donations received and any grants dispersed, that kind of activity. And unless approved by the foundation, donors do not normally get investment statements issued to them because they are owned by their accounts owned by the foundation. But there's, that does happen on occasion. And lastly, the disbursement quota. We've talked about that quite a bit. It is applicable only at the foundation level, not at the fund level, despite some discussion about that. Exceptions, of course, can be made on a case-to-case basis. And as I pointed out at the beginning of my part of the session, in practice, most donor-advised fund foundations do exceed the required disbursement quota each year. So that's really it, except I would like to say before we open the floor to dialogue that as Malcolm mentioned, we are the working group has got some volunteers working on specific stakeholder pieces. We're hopeful that they will be ready sort of in the September timeframe. So there'll be one for donors, there'll be one for charities, one for DAF organizations, and one for financial advisors. So we look forward to being able to share that with you when those are ready. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then hopefully Tara will be able to help us with any questions that.
Of course.
We've had a flood of great questions. Tara,
yes,
over to you.
Thank you both so much. And really just a shout out to those in attendance. It's been a really engaging chat. So I've been keeping track as best as possible, and we will try to get through as many as possible. And I'll definitely start off by noting there was a big thank you, Nicola and Malcolm, to you and the group for the work. Definitely noting that DAFs our work and serve up charities in increasingly improving ways, and the value that they bring to enhance the charitable sector. So there were a number of comments around anonymity. So definitely quite a number of those in attendance chatting about how they have received those calls from organizations without being willing to share some of that information about the donor or anything else really. So you really, I think, hit the nail on the head there. Another colleague of yours noting that many donors correlate anonymous with public recognition, not understanding that the charity doesn't receive the info. So definitely folks understand and are with you with some of those main points that you have raised. So a few questions that have come up. When do DAF holders receive tax receipts?
When they make the donation like they do to any other charity. So they're making an irrevocable donation to the foundation that holds the donor advised fund. And that's distinct from the grant, which is an inter-charity transfer from the foundation to whatever charity or charitable purpose that it goes to. So just like every other charity and every other donation.
Wonderful, thank you. So this came in at the beginning. So it was noted that the session today was called Standards of Practice of Donor Advised Funds. but the person who posed the question noticed that a DAF foundation and a public foundation with DAFs was used interchangeably. Is there a distinction to use?
It's a great question. Thanks, Christopher, for that. You'll notice that we haven't fully settled on language, but we're started to use donor advised fund foundations, donor advised fund organizations, or foundations with donor advised fund. The key thing here is a donor advised fund is not an organization, it's a fund. So you often hear in the charitable sector, oh, it's a DAF, they run a DAF, they work at a DAF. And it's actually a foundation that has donor advised funds. And that's a really key point. And but this is American usage that has come north of the border, naming donor advised funds, foundations with donor advised funds simply as DAFs. And I mean, not speaking for the committee, but my own opinion is that this is very problematic. It essentially tries to separate out donor advised foundations or organizations with donor advised funds from the rest of the charitable sector. And I think the primary obligation has to be as a registered charity. So.
Great, thank you so much. Would you consider organizations such as Canada Helps and Benevity a donor advised fund?
Go ahead.
For me, Canada Helps, whilst they do, I think, offer some donor advised funds, are primarily focused on raising funds through electronic means for charities across the country. That includes some donor advised funds, I have to say. And the same with Benevity. Benevity is involved in a number of programs for corporate organizations and doing with their, helping with their administer their matching schemes for charitable organizations, and they too are involved in electronic transfers of grants to charitable organizations. So they both are charitable organizations. They both issue receipts.
Well, we're losing you a little bit.
It's a super interesting question. If I can just jump in as Nicola deals with some lag, is that the whole idea of built into the Canadian charitable system is intermediary charities, and Canada Helps and Benevity is an intermediary charity. Foundations are often intermediary charities, but they function in different ways. One is, so Canada Helps, I was on the board for a number of years at Canada Helps, is those are ins and outs, but you can make a single donation and send it to 10 different charities. So technically it's gifts and grants, but there's no time lag. But think about as well something like the United Way movement, which has been around for almost 80 years, is that it's something that's an intermediary charity as well, but it doesn't have separate standalone donor advised funds, but it is sort of a function, this aggregation of donations for distribution to multiple causes.
Amazing, thank you. We do seem to have Nicola on some technical issues, so hopefully she may be able to join. Otherwise, her wonderful image is frozen. And Malcolm, we still have you, so hopefully
that's why we work
being able
to keep going
to go through a few more questions. We do have a plethora of questions, and I don't know if we'll get to them all, but we'll try to get through some overarching ones. As an organization that receives donation via DAFs, do you have recommendation on things that could be doing to better engage with the DAF managers around focal points, advising donors, exchange of information, and such as needed?
In our world, great question. We try and make sure as much as possible that Aqueduct Foundation is to be a bridge, not a dam, to get out of the way, to encourage our donors to have relationships with their charities, and as much as possible have direct relationships. And so we actively encourage and support that stewarding. And sometimes we constantly. We have multiple meetings each week with individual charities about what they're doing, what their priorities are, and we're able to share that. But we're not in the fundraising business. We can share, but increasingly we're using things like technology. If you send thank you letters, if you send information, it'll end up on the donors portal. So we want to, as much as possible, get out of the way and make sure that that relationship exists, because last year Aqueduct made almost 5,000 grants. So we can't know every charity in detail, nor really mediate every single sort of fundraising request.
Amazing. Nicola, thank you for coming back. We missed you while you were gone. That's okay. Malcolm was holding down the fort as questions continue to pour in. So thank you for rejoining us. Okay. And so we do have a number of questions really around the relationship between charities and the DAF advisors. And so I know that that is quite vital as it takes time. But as we wrap on some final questions, I just want to ask for your number one piece of advice, perhaps for your charity practitioners. And I think being a bridge, not a dam, should be stuck on that wall there. I think that's a vital piece of information, but it seems to be a constant thread in some of these questions. So I'll ask you for sort of a closing piece of advice for your colleagues to help make that relationship better.
I think that one key thing, at least from our organization at Benefaction, and I know Aqueduct has a similar page, there are a page or two posted on the websites expressly for charities, giving information about granting policies and what helping to set their expectations in terms of what we'll receive. So step one would be to check those out. And step two, if they have any questions, to pick up the phone and call us. We have teams of people who are in the granting administration area, and they're happy to field calls from charitable organizations, share any information that we can. Sometimes we have to say no. But, we certainly have established some great rapport with different organizations, in particular when we're getting, the Red Cross I have to give a shout out to, because they get a lot of gifts by credit card from us and from others. And we were able to help them realize exactly which staffs they were coming from by providing them with weekly reports. And this was during periods where there was a lot of need, and they had special programs on to help different efforts, whether it be fire or war or what have you. So we're here to try to help if we can, and please don't hesitate to reach out, would be my advice.
Excellent. Thank you, Malcolm. Closing advice?
Oh, couldn't agree more. One of the things that, and Nicola and I, both our organizations, all of our people are on the website. We have FAQs for charities about how we grant, how to identify a grant, how to sort out a grant, how to work better with us. We think, back to the best practices point, we think this is really important, is that we need to be really responsible grantors and really responsible members of the charitable community and work well with charities. So, and this is an ongoing process. So we're really grateful for the dialogue today.
Excellent. Thank you both very, very much. Thank you to our engaging and captivating audience for participating in the chat and your wonderful questions. I will just lean into the fact that you are all part of the CAGP network, and to lean into the thought leadership and expertise and your regions and your chapters and all of the great work that you're doing across the country. This is a collaborative process, and we will continue to build in these areas. So before you jump off today, I would like to take another moment to thank our presenters and let you know that there will be a short survey that will be shared in the chat amongst the accolades and thanks for our presenters. It will be there. It is a short survey and very valuable to our presenters and to CAGP. So please take a moment to fill that out. Another thing to keep an eye out for is we will have our in-person gift planning fundamentals taking place in Toronto on Thursday, June 19th. And we will soon be opening registration for Strategic Planning Bootcamp, which will also be in person, Bequest Management Essentials, which will be held online and accessible to those across the country, and they all be taking place in the fall. We do have another webinar coming up in this series on May the 28th. So we ask you if you're able to join Ryan Fraser, Robert Kleinman, and Serena Hack on the presentation around unusual uses of gift planning vehicles. And then the last webinar of the season will be on Wednesday, June the 18th. It will be in French on les règlements de succession, procédure globale pour bien administrer les successions dans une ONBL. And that will be presented by Natalia Kishtuga and Isabelle Rivet. So again, folks, if you have any more questions about any of CAGP's educational events, please reach out to Erin at the national office. And a reminder that our education program, including webinar Wednesdays like today, are made possible through the generosity of the supporters of the CAGP Foundation. Many people like you, and if you're inspired to support the work we do to strengthen our sector in strategic philanthropy, like donor advised fund working groups, please consider making a gift. We're at cagpfoundation.org. And a huge thanks to Pear Tree Canada for sponsoring Webinar Wednesdays. Thank you again, Nicola and Malcolm, for this fantastic webinar. Nicola, despite your technology issues, for hanging out with us. It's been a real pleasure. I wish you all a wonderful week, and I thank you all again for joining us. Take good care, everybody.
Thanks, Tara.
Cheers.
Thank you, Tara.